Well, welcome to our Bible study this fabulous Wednesday evening here on May 20th. We're so glad that you are here joining us with us, whether live or on video. Nice to have you guys with us too. All right, we're in 1 Kings chapter 3, picking up where we left off last week. Now, just so you guys understand, I know this is an awe moment. We got this week and next week, and then I'll be done for a while because we have our Thriving Thursdays coming up. So between this, yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I got at least a couple. So between this week and next week, I'll finish off all of Solomon. All right, so forgive me if I jump some chapters today and come back next week as I finish it up. So we were talking last week, as we were going, we were talking about Solomon's asking for wisdom, yes? And the idea of what really is wisdom. And I told you that in my mind it really encompasses three things. I think there is an element of knowledge that goes down into wisdom. I think there is an element of experience. And then I think there's an element of good judgment. Being able to pull all three of those things together. And sometimes with some people, God gives them an awful lot of grace in one of those three that they might not have had. Would you guys agree? Some of the wisest men might not have been, or some of the wisest women might not have been a person who went to college. They might not have gone and gotten a tremendous amount of book knowledge. I will tell you that in 29 years worth of teaching, especially in Christian schools, I have taught with some people who, they didn't have a college degree, but wow, did God give them a gift to teach and a heart to teach, and they just did a fabulous job. At the same time, I have taught with people who have multiple degrees and probably shouldn't have a foot in a classroom, you know? So, I mean, I think, you know, we never want to take out the element of God's provision for any one of those three. Like I said, I think a young man, a young preacher, and I'll put it in that terms, I suppose, can still show that he has such experience, even if he hasn't had quite the experience we would think, because I think God gives him that, what he needs. Again, if you take a look at what the Bible says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, right? And we're grateful for the fact of what Solomon asked. We're going to pick up there in 1 Kings chapter 3, if you want to join me there. So we'll go ahead and go back to verse 9, just summarize last week. It says, "Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this thy so great a people?" Keep in mind the motivation of Solomon in his request. When he was given the opportunity to ask for something, he didn't ask for something for himself. He didn't seek for fame. He didn't seek for power. He didn't seek for wealth. He sought for an understanding heart because he knew the job ahead of him was going to be so great. And I think he had a desire to live up to that, especially at the start. "And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing, and God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked thyself for long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked for the life of thine enemies, but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall arise any like unto thee." That's the Lord speaking. You do understand that, right? That it wasn't just an issue of Solomon's the wisest man to ever live. According to what the Bible is saying, short of Christ, to all man but all God, Solomon is the wisest person. Peace offerings and made a feast to all his servants. Just out of curiosity, where did he make the 1,000 offerings? Where was he at? What city? Go back and look it up. That's right. That's what I'll tell my students to do. It's in the chapter. Go find it. Give me a verse. Where was he at? Where was he? Gibeon. What verse? What verse? Verse 5. So he went to Gibeon, made 1,000 sacrifices. We talked last week about how long that would have taken, correct? Was the ark in Gibeon? No. It was in Jerusalem. Why did he go to Gibeon? All right, that's where we had. If you want to think about it, it's the past, right? Because what is Solomon most known for after the wisdom thing? He built the temple. He built God an actual house in a single location instead of a tent that was meant to be moved around as they wandered through the wilderness. We see here going from the past, working our way into the present, right? And into the future. And he comes back to Jerusalem and he makes another sacrifice there. It says then in verse 16, then came there 2 women that were harlots unto the king and stood before him. Now, what's the time frame between he came back and made sacrifices and these 2 ladies come to see him? I don't know. I have a feeling in my mind it was pretty quick. Why? I think it's proof of what God had done for Solomon. Now, I'm going to quickly go over the narrative, all right? So just bear with me as I read really fast. If you need to read slower, that's fine. All right. It says, and the one woman said, O my Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day that after I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night because she overlaid it. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me, while thine handmaiden slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in mine. And when I arose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. I'm going to stop there for a moment. Don't you love those kind of arguments? This person says one thing, this person says the other. Would you guys agree with that? Have you ever been in that? Maybe with your own kids? I only have one, so I never had to worry about 2 kids, bickering back and forth on that. Nope, you're wrong. I'm right. I'm the adult. Right? But have you guys dealt with that? I mean, when I was principal at the Christian school, I will not lie that there were plenty of times that you would sit in a meeting, parent and child say this, teacher over here says this, that are 100% opposite of each other. And I would like to say that, part of being a Christian school principal is to realize that sometimes the truth is somewhere in the middle. I mean, it kind of lists to one side or the other, but it's not usually 100% either way. I don't want to sound bad. You don't really have that option here, do you? It's one way or the other, no questions asked. Who is the child's mother? Now, today, piece of cake. What would we do today if we had that kind of argument arise? DNA. That's right. And do you know what it stands for? This one's free, people. There we go. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Got to love DNA from the 23 pairs of chromosomes that you have in each and every one of your cells. I watched a TED Talk on some of this the other night. I'm just telling you. Solomon didn't have that luxury. I know, it should look like the child's mother. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't care what anybody says. Yes, this will be on video, and I'm sorry, and I will take the abuse for it. No baby when they're born looks pretty. I'm just saying. I don't know that he could have told from that. But look at what Solomon decides to do. I want you to think about this for a moment, because I might give you a slightly different take than what you normally hear in this, but this is just me. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son, and she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but go ahead and divide it. Then the king answered and said, Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof. Usually, this is how I've always heard it in the past. What was the wise wisdom part? The fact that he could come up with that kind of a solution. Who would have thought to grab a sword and threaten to cut the kid in half? By the way, he didn't threaten. He said to cut the kid in half. Yes? Could you imagine if that happened today? What would that look like in the news? One of our leaders is hearing a dispute, and they decided, we're just going to cut the kid in half. It says in verse 28, And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. I don't think the wisdom part was his unique solution to the problem. There are a lot of unique solutions to problems, yes? I want you to listen to this puzzle and see if you can come up with the explanation. Are you ready? A guy pushes his car and stops at a hotel and suddenly realizes he's bankrupt. Why? A guy pushes his car, stops at a hotel, and suddenly realizes he's bankrupt. Now, I can't give this too long because of the video aspect of it. Couldn't find his wallet. But he's totally bankrupt. Lost everything. No quick thoughts, right? This is not a quick thinking problem. Would you like to know the solution? The game of Monopoly. Push your car, stop at a hotel, you're bankrupt. If I have to explain it, it's not funny. How about this one? A guy wants to go home, but he's afraid to go home because there's a man with a mask there. Baseball. Unique solution to a problem, correct? I don't think the wisdom part was in the unique solution to the problem. Are you going to tell me that any barbarian wouldn't have come up with the same idea? Well, here, give me a sword. The only difference is he would have followed through. What made Solomon wise? And this is my opinion. I'm allowed to have it, right? I think as Solomon is looking at these two women, because we don't have visual for this, I don't think there was a doubt in Solomon's mind who the mother was. See, that's what I think the wisdom part was. When they walked in, I think he knew the answer. I think God gave him the answer. He came up with a unique solution to show to everybody else. To prove it, right? That made sense. When it says here that they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment, that fear and respect aspect, I don't believe is because they're sitting there thinking, wow, he can come up with the coolest way to solve a problem. I think it's because they realized, can you imagine that he knew? It's like he's a mind reader. I watched another TED Talk. This is about a guy who, in his past, he was a hacker. And he brought a guy up on stage and he says, I'm going to tell you what your 4-digit PIN number is for your bank card. And I started watching it, and he did this thing where he has the guy's hand like this, and he says, I do not want you to think of your first number. Do not think of your first number. And he starts going like this as he counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And he keeps doing this, and he does it about 3 times, and he looks at the guy and goes, now, tell me, you weren't really thinking of your number. You were trying not to think of your number. And he went, yes. And he said, you were thinking of the number 7. And the guy went, yes. He said, but your first number's 2. And he went, yes. And the guy was sitting there going, you say, that's a trick. It's a guy who knows how to read people, yes? The difference is God gave Solomon that ability, correct? So much so that spread quickly. Can you imagine? I mean, I know they didn't have Facebook, Instagram, or social media or anything to spread it. Can you imagine how quickly through word of mouth that went out there? Did you hear what the king did? It was like he just knew. By the way, don't forget, we also had how he dealt with the other 3 guys back in chapter 2 that we really didn't go over. His wisdom is becoming well known. Go to the second half of chapter 4. I'm not going to read all the people in the first half. You can read that and about all the requirement. I'm going to jump to verse 29. In verse 29 it says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much. Isn't it nice to know that God can give above what we ask or think? Yes? And the blessings that God gives us. But I want you to notice the next part, because I rarely have heard this ever preached. What else did God give Solomon? Largeness of heart. Can we go back to Proverbs 30? We won't flip there. But do you remember what I told you? I believe Bathsheba taught Solomon. When she said about being king, she said you need to stay away from things that are going to make you make bad judgments. And then she also told him about, you need to be willing to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves, right? Let me go back to the narrative just a moment ago. What was the occupation of these two women? Harlots. Is that a noble profession in Israel? Is that something that, everybody was jumping and cheering for as they walked in? Do you think that the king normally would have had these two women come before him? I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. In the Old Testament, what was the punishment for that? It was pretty harsh and severe, wasn't it? Most people don't stop to think about that. It wasn't just that Solomon was wise and knew who the mother was. The fact that God gave Solomon an understanding heart is evident in the fact that he even saw these two women in the first place. Can you imagine that? I know how we always imagine this. We imagine this, that he's sitting on his throne, correct? And these two ladies show up. Can I throw another picture at it, possibly? Maybe he just finished at the temple. Maybe he's walking out, and these two women come up to him really quick. And instead of dismissing them, and you know that happens with famous people, don't you? You want to hear a story? I tell a story. I have good stories. You guys know who Hank Aaron is? Hank Aaron, right? I mean, come on. Baseball legend. We were driving a group from Pensacola down to Orlando for the state science fair. How in the world they chose me to go with them, with Miss Stansel, I'll never know. But I ended up going with them. We stopped in a restaurant for lunch, and I'm not lying. Do you know who's there? Hank Aaron. Some of the guys were so excited. They ran over to try and get his autograph. Before they could get anywhere close, some guy stops them and says, if you want an autograph, you can come show up at such and such a place. It'll cost you $60. I would say that that is not an understanding heart. Would you? What could Solomon have done when these two women, in their occupation that they had, showed up? No. You are not worth my time. But you see, God didn't just give Solomon wisdom. Sometimes we forget that just like we see from Bathsheba telling him, God also gives him largeness of heart. And you say, what does that mean to me? Does that mean he has some kind of cardiac condition? What do we normally think of when we think of somebody who has a big heart? Generous, compassionate, the opposite of me? I don't know. I don't really fall in that category most of the time. I don't think compassion is one of my spiritual gifts. Sarcasm, maybe. Compassion, no. But are you following me? To sit here and realize how much more it was than just, oh, God gave Solomon wisdom. Because what is good judgment if we don't also have compassion? Do you guys agree? We need both. And if you're in a position of authority, you realize you need to have both. You have to have wisdom, but you have to have compassion. You have to have that understanding. And as a result, verse 30, and Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men. And it mentions some guys. It says, and his fame was in all nations round about, and he spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. Now, I will take a moment, and I will ask. Most of his proverbs that we are familiar with, I would assume most of them, are found in the book of Proverbs, correct? 3,000, there's probably more than what's there. I'm sure we've lost out on quite a few. Do you have a favorite verse from Proverbs that has some tidbit of wisdom that you would care to share? Take a moment. I can sit for 30 seconds. Would you like to look one up? While you look one up, I'll share one. Is that okay? And you feel free. I would love to have some audience participation. I will give you this one because what would impress me more than talking about food, correct? So Proverbs 15, verse 17. It says, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. That's good preaching, isn't it? It's better to get by with just a little bit and have love and harmony in your house than it is to have all the wealth and all the prosperity and the fatted calf and nobody gets along with anybody. I'm just saying. Does somebody have one they'd like to share? I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, in my Bible, I got several of them underlined. I'm sure that's, one I liked. What you got? All right, 25:28. I'll read it just for the microphone's sake, as soon as I can find it. 25:28. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. Good. Another one. Does anybody else have another one to share? A word of wisdom from Solomon. Just getting us thinking tonight. You got another one? From Faith. There we go. Proverbs 20. I'll read it. That's good. Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. By the way, it works also with a good man too. All right. So that's good. Yeah, I mean, you think about it. Your name is everything, right? We live in a society today where instead of our handshake and our name, our word being our bond, you don't want to trust anybody anymore, do you? I can remember back in the day driving to Pensacola from Michigan, and my car broke down outside. I was still in Alabama. We'd come down the 65, and then we'd hit the 10 and cut across this way coming from Michigan. And I remember my car broke down on the side of the road. And I'm sorry, I don't know what else to say, but these two Bubbas came by, and I mean, they were, redneck, beat up pickup truck, the whole thing. And I mean, when they pulled over, I'm sitting here going, that's it. I'm going to lose my car. They're just going to tow it away, and I'm going to do nothing with it. I had a stick shift, and they actually pushed my car, and we got it jumped. And they said, there you go. And I mean, they were just two good guys who just stopped to help me. And it was like, would you do that today? No, thank you. I got AAA coming on the way. Just please keep moving along. Nothing to see here. That's what I would do today, wouldn't you? I mean, think about it. You don't know who's going to stop anymore. It scares you. That's a good one. One more, maybe one more. You got one? What you got? Proverbs 3:5. That is a good one. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. It's important that we study and trust God rather than trust ourselves. I don't know about you, but I make a lot of mistakes every day. John, did you have one? We got time? 1728. 1728. There we go. It says, even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise, and he that shutteth his lips is esteemed a man of understanding. Yes, my dad used to say often, it is better to be, better to keep thy mouth closed and be thought of a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. You guys have heard that one, right? Yeah. Say, what is our wisdom like today? Our wisdom like today comes from television shows. My biggest word of wisdom that I learned came from that most notable thinker, Peter Brady. It goes like this. Mom always says you shouldn't play ball in the house. That's the kind of wisdom that we have in our society today, isn't it? I'm just saying. 3,000, over 3,000 Proverbs. 1,000 songs. Verse 33, he spake of trees from cedar trees that are in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the walls. He spake also of beasts and of fowl and of creeping things and of fishes. Weird things to sing about, but okay. And there came all the people to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. Now keep in mind, this is what God did through Solomon, correct? Because Solomon had a heart at that point to understand, I need that wise and understanding heart to judge your people. It was a great start. Now, I'm going to go ahead and skip over a couple chapters because next week I'll just talk about the temple. Fair enough? I want to talk really quick about the end of Solomon's life. Because if you read in the book of Chronicles, or if you read here, there's really not a whole lot of chapters about Solomon. Why? I mean, we got a whole bunch about Saul. We got a whole bunch about David. Why do we have so much about Solomon? That's it. There really wasn't a whole lot going on. I mean, when you think about it, he was wise and understanding, had a compassionate heart. He built the temple, and we know the Queen of Sheba story. Right? And we know that he had, lots of women. Lots of wives and concubines. So we're going to jump really quick over to chapter 10. Just want to throw it out one more time. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. There you go. That's what you want, right? That's like taking your AP exam. My AP physics kids, they still took their AP exam. And, some took AP calculus, bio, there's all kinds of AP exams. Or, if you're, what do they call them up in New York? The Regents exams that they take at the end of every year. Here we have our end of course exams. And she came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him all of her that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king, which he told her not. Can I just go ahead and throw this one step out further? Because this is how, as I read this and as I think back. First off, we understand that this is not all occurring just at the very beginning of Solomon's reign. Ooh, wise guy, look at all the people coming. This is something that's occurring throughout decades. You follow me? But when I read that verse, it reminds me of Daniel. Do you remember when Daniel went in and Nebuchadnezzar says, I have a troubling dream, I need the interpretation. And all of his wise men said, well, tell us what the dream is. I'll tell you what the interpretation is. And he went, I can't remember. And the guys went, well, how do you expect us to interpret it if you don't tell us what it is? He says, you're supposed to be wise guys. You tell me what the dream is and interpret it. Do you guys remember that narrative? Daniel went and prayed, and what did God do? Gave him the dream with specifics, not vague, and told him the interpretation, correct? I think that a lot of what went on here is very similar to what I see with Daniel. It's talking about the fact in verse 3 that Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom and the house that he had built, and just it continues to go on and talks about in verse 6 that it was a true report that I heard in my own land of thy acts and thy wisdom, howbeit I believed not the words until I came and saw. I think we have something very similar here. To sit here and think about how God blessed Solomon, right? And for many, many years, this was the norm. Until when? Until we get to chapter 11. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites, the Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go into them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. Now, I'll go ahead and throw it back in the time frame. You do realize that many of these women, sorry, it's very not politically correct today, many of these women were probably gifts, right? Many of them were probably treaty things. But what does it say about Solomon in his relationship with these women? Did you catch what it said at the end of verse 3? Or I'm sorry, at the end of verse 2? Oh, even more so than that. It said that he loved them. And as a result, what happens when you love somebody so much? You want to please them, correct? So what happens when these women, verse 3 says he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. How? Well, you have a place to worship your God. Why can't I have a place to worship my God? I mean, if I have to come live here, can I at least, have a little place where, I can worship Baal or Ashtaroth or Molech or, the TJ Maxx, I don't know, wherever you want to worship. And then it goes one step further. Well, why can't you come with me when I go worship this, that, and the other thing? And one of the things that Bathsheba told Solomon later on in Solomon's life, because if you continue to read in verse 4, it says, "For it came to pass when Solomon was old." This was not a young thing. This is not a young Solomon. We're not talking about the fact that the majority of Solomon's reign, he was turned away after other gods. We're talking about the fact when he is old. You want my opinion? Last 5, 10 years tops. I'm thinking the last 5. That's my opinion. I'm sticking with my opinion. Okay? You can have yours. That his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. We keep going back to this because I've said it a million times. David was a man after God's own heart, not because he was sinless, not because he was perfect. It's because every time he was confronted with his wrongdoing, he repented and got things right with God. He didn't turn after other gods. Oh yes, he turned away from God. You know what I mean? He got back, what we would use the term backslidden today. But whenever he got confronted, true repentance, back to a right relationship with God. Solomon, no. And as a result of what happened, you can read in verse 7 about him building high places for all of these different wives and their gods. It says in verse 9, "And the Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice." The second time is during the temple building. We'll talk about that next week. "And he had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, For as much as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. Notwithstanding, in thy days I will not do it for David thy father's sake, but I will rend it out of the hand of thy son. Howbeit I will not rend away all the kingdom, but will give one tribe to thy son for David's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, which I have chosen." And then you'll notice in verse 15, for a very long time we have peace in Israel, yes? And you'll notice what also happens. "And the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon." And if you keep reading, and we won't take the time because of the clock, there actually are a couple. And one of them has the name of Jeroboam. And those of you who know what's coming up realize who Jeroboam is. So what's the lesson? Well, at the end, even a wise man can do stupid stuff. Would you guys agree? And there was a consequence for it. Not during his lifetime, but during his son's lifetime. And we understand that the nation of Israel splits, and for the next several hundred years, what's going to go on between Israel and Judah as a result. As a result of what? As a result of Solomon not listening to his mom and dad. Mom said, you stay away from those strange women. Dad said, you follow after the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. You keep his commandments, his judgments, his statutes. If Solomon had done those two things, what a different story we might have had. You think about it? All right. Next week, we will take a look at the temple. And then starting, I think it's May 27th, we'll be starting our Thriving Thursdays. And Pastor, I'm sure... today's the 27th is the last day. Okay, that's me. Okay, so it's the week after that. I apologize. No, you're right. Thank you for the correction. And we'll pick up there. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Our Heavenly Father, we're grateful for your love to us. We're grateful for the lessons we learned. Lord, I pray that you'd make us wise and that we would seek after wisdom. Lord, that you'd help us to have understanding and compassionate hearts. Lord, help us to be faithful throughout all our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.